So what's another unpopular opinion you have?
One thing I always say is most business owners are woefully unprepared for what they're trying to do.
Welcome to Gratitude Geek. I'm your host, Candice Rodarty. I'm a productivity coach helping female business owners build genuine, lasting connections with clients, colleagues, and community. Today, I'm joined by small business mentor Andrew Frazier. We are talking about unpopular opinions about scaling your small business. Welcome, Andrew.
Hey, how you doing, Candice? Thanks for having me on the show.
I'm super excited to talk to you. We met a few weeks ago and you have an amazing story. I can't wait for the audience to hear it. So, Andrew, tell us your story. What do you want the audience to know about you?
Well, you always start out sometimes where you end up. So my first business was actually at fourth grade. My brother and I had a paper route, 5 years, 7 days a week in Pittsburgh. And since we knew everybody, we created a snow shoveling business and hired our friends as well. So we were enterprising from early on. My parents were teachers, so I had to do well in school. So I actually have a degree in mechanical engineering from MIT and went through the Navy ROTC program. So after graduating, I served as a U.S. Navy Supply Corps officer on board the USS Clark FFG-11, where I ran all the business functions for a ship. So I paid everybody in the retail, food service, and supply parts. So it was a great experience, sort of shifting me towards business from engineering. After leaving, working as a chief operating officer for a national nonprofit, I left to really focus on buying a business. And while I was doing that, I was also coaching and consulting and training entrepreneurs and small business owners. Although buying a business proved elusive, and after a couple of years, when it didn't come together, my other business went really well. I grew, I helped a lot of people, and 15 years later, I'm still doing it, having worked with over 1,000 business owners one-on-one, and really love what I do, being able to help people, mentor people, and help them understand the path to growing their business and scaling.
So talking about unpopular opinions around small business growth is a good topic for you. I think you might be an expert in that topic. Before we dig into that, I'd really like to talk about your pivot from engineer to running the business operations of a Navy ship. How did that happen?
Well, it's interesting. While I was in college, I actually had a business too. But since I went on, through ROTC, I looked at different opportunities, and supply corps officer seemed like a good route. I met someone who was a supply corps officer and loved it, and just said, after you're done, it's a great experience to have in your background. So definitely love my experience there, being on the water, serving our shipmates and just serving the country. It was a great experience.
Were you on a supply ship or a ship of war?
I was on a warship.
A warship. So just the general numbers, how many sailors were on the ship?
So we were on a smaller ship, so we had about 200 sailors.
200. Of those 200 sailors, how many of them were actually integral to the war part of being on that ship?
Well, in the military, most people are support for the ship. So I'd probably say 10%. You had the combat systems people that, we had a guided missile and guns. So they sort of managed that. But, everything else was supporting the ship being able to get to where it needed to do to fulfill its mission.
So you need the engineers, you need the cooks, you need the people who clean the heads, you need all of that. You need the people on the deck who make sure the ship knows what the navigators and all that.
Yes.
Obviously, I've never been in the Navy and I don't know much about ships. So really, a 200-person warship is a small business. It's just in the business of protecting.
Yes. And basically we were the business people for that business. It was great experience. In the military, you never know what your experience is going to be. Some people go to an aircraft carrier and have like 5,000 people. It's like a floating city. There they have, a whole bunch of supply car officers. On my ship, we only had 2. So I got to do a little bit of everything.
I'm of the generation where my father and my uncles were all in the military. That's just the generation. There's been a shift. There's been a shift in generation. So I'm familiar with different things. And I had an uncle that served on a submarine. My dad actually was flown around the world fixing walk-in computer. Remember when computers were big enough to fill a room?
Yes.
My dad was one of the few people in the entire world who could repair those mainframe computers. And so they flew him all over the world. You know, the US government flew him all over the world to repair these computers. And then I had another uncle that was a spy. These are all within the military. The military is such an important part of not just the safety and security of a country, but other things as well. I mean, I would say that my father was a goodwill ambassador.
Uh-huh.
I mean, he would go to these countries and repair their computers for them. As a goodwill ambassador, right?
Yes.
We didn't have to do that as a country. It was something that we did. We made money doing it too. I'm sure that the U.S. government billed the other country enormously for my dad, but it's just the military is such an important part of our economy and everything. I really appreciate that you served. So I just wanted to share that part of your story because I appreciate you, and I'm sure the people in the audience appreciate you as well. All right, so let's talk about some unpopular opinions around small business growth. What's an unpopular opinion you hear a lot?
Well, I think that a lot of people try and go it alone and think that just working harder is going to get you where you need to be. And it's really the opposite. You know, you have to develop your relationships. You have to develop your resources. You have to develop your knowledge. And none of that you can really do sufficiently on your own.
Do you, there's solopreneurs. My husband and I are still business partners, so I'm not technically a solopreneur. I have a business partner. He happens to have his own business now, and I have my own business now, but we have one umbrella, right, corporation. But before, when we had our previous business, we were partners, and we filled each other's gaps. Like, he was operations, and I was the executive branch, and and I did the financing and the bookkeeping and the sales and marketing, and he ran the shop, and he was in charge of the employees and making sure that production was smooth and that we pushed out all of our orders and all that. So we managed to fill each other's gaps. And I know that when you're a solopreneur, that's a lot harder to find that person. So something that I did very early on, and we launched our business in 98. So that was a long time ago. I happened to find some women who were in a similar situation where their business paid their bills, because back in the day, and please, listener, do not take this the wrong way, but back in the day, a work-at-home mom usually meant you had some sort of network marketing business, or you did some sort of craft and you made a little side hustle, and you might have made $500 a month. The ladies that I met, we all provided the income for our families, and so we had a small little. Now I know it's a mastermind. Back then it was a water cooler, right? Now I know we had a mastermind group, but we didn't call it that, and we were there to support each other. And just finding that group of women was enormously beneficial for my peace of mind, my sanity, and the growth of my business. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. Do not try to go it alone. If you can't find a group of women or a group of people that are like-minded, hire a coach. Chances are that coach is running mastermind groups.
Yeah. I mean, definitely. Getting help. I have 3 people I meet with every week who are also business owners, and we just talk about our businesses.
Yeah, and that's a mastermind.
Right.
You just don't call it that.
Right. So, so definitely, but I would just caution people to talk to people who actually know about business and your type of business. There's a lot of coaches out there, but, actually a business coach that coaches you on business rather than leadership and managing yourself and motivation is totally different. So each has its place, but definitely you need to get access to the expertise that you need so that you're learning and it can, help you avoid common pitfalls.
So I have an unpopular opinion that you're probably not going to like.
Okay.
I think that, I wish I knew the numbers off the top of my head. I wonder if I can Google it quickly. Hold on.
A few moments later.
5 million small businesses in the USA, 27 million of them are solo-owned businesses. So there are 27 million solo-owned businesses in the United States today. And I believe that most of them don't really want to grow. They just want more control over their business. What are your thoughts on that?
I would say 50-50. I think a lot of them want to grow, but don't know how to and never end up growing. And maybe they give up. And they say, well, just, let me just have more control. But I think most people, when they envision what they want their business to be, it's something that is growing and vibrant and that eventually they can sell or hire other people so that they're not in their business working themselves to death.
Yeah. I, I, I wonder if how many of them though are like, I really just don't want to hire anybody other than maybe a virtual assistant. I want to be able to do it. I want to have control over it myself. I know that when we had 6 employees, it was a lot harder to wrangle than we just had when we had 2.
Uh-huh.
Right? Did we make more money with 6? I don't know. I don't know. I know that the gross income was higher, but I don't know if the net income was higher when we had 6. But I know that when we had 2, it was a well-oiled humming machine, and I think we were comfortable there. So I don't. I think we were comfortable where we're. I mean, yeah, everybody wants to make a little bit more money, but in terms of people, the number of people that you hire, I think a lot of people are not as comfortable, and you can argue with me on this, are not as comfortable hiring.
I think that's right because most business owners don't really do a good job hiring. But what I would say is most business owners envision themselves selling their business eventually and having a business that's valuable and having a business that they might be able to step back from a little bit. And I think that they don't achieve those goals. Going from sort of smaller to medium and large size, it takes a really special individual to be able to lead an organization down that path, along with a lot of mentoring, coaching, and support. So not many business owners are able to do that. But you sort of were in the middle. You had to work a lot harder because you had a few employees. But if you had kept growing and you got up to 25 or 50 employees, then it wouldn't have been bad. It's just you only grew to a certain point.
Yeah, but we were at the point where we were comfortable. So
Yes.
it's your turn to share an unpopular opinion.
Okay. Well, okay.
So what is another unpopular opinion that you've run across?
Well, I think that many business owners think they understand what marketing is and how to market. And even a lot of people who are business owners who help other people with marketing don't really know what marketing is. But, the first thing is, when you're a business owner, your job is to sell and market. And most people don't realize that. It's unpopular because most people don't see themselves as a salesperson or a marketing person. So I think that's a, unpopular, situation that a lot of people find themselves in unexpectedly.
The thing that most of us don't realize is that all of us are in sales. Every single one of us. A teacher is constantly selling students on why they need to learn, right? A teacher is selling students on why this is the way you solve this math problem. It's happening all the time. People are selling. The teacher is a great example. The folks who come at sales from an educational standpoint are the best sellers. And sales is under the umbrella of marketing. And marketing isn't just sales. I run a group coaching program called Robusta. It's for female solopreneurs. And most of them come to me because they want me to teach them how to use Canva to create pretty graphics. And so what have I been working on for the last 6 weeks? I've been teaching them how to write because most folks think marketing is pretty pictures.
Uh-huh.
And marketing is really psychology. Do you agree?
I definitely agree. I mean, one thing I find a lot of people do is they hire people to create a beautiful website, but it's the content that, is what drives the effectiveness of your site. So it's the words, it's the imaging, it's the way that you communicate, just that it's beautiful.
I was just having a conversation with a web designer yesterday, the day before, and he was complaining about how many of his clients just want a single page website. And then they complain that they aren't ranking in the search engines. And he's like, well, I tried to explain to you when you hired me that you need content, not just a website.
So, yeah.
And content, I'm sorry, content is normally blog posts. It's not social media posts.
Definitely, yeah. If you want them to get to your website, definitely a blog is key. So, yeah, there's so many facets to it. And, definitely sales and marketing. Most people, the other thing is a lot of people think they can get out there and do sales and marketing without any training. They're just out there winging it. So how successful do you think you're actually going to be at it?
Yeah. Or they follow scripts and formulas.
Yeah.
which the script and the formula teaches you what you need to say, but you then stop using the script and now you know what to say, right?
And you got to be authentic. People can tell if you're reading a script or you actually know what you're talking.
Oh, yeah. I can tell when I'm reading a script when I listen to my podcasts. Y'all know that I'm reading when I'm doing the intro and the outro. The rest of the time, I'm just having a great time, right? And you can tell. You can tell. That's an excellent example of the difference between a script and a conversation. You can tell when someone's scripted. I went very early on when I rebooted this podcast. I had a guest on who was a professional speaker.
Mm-hmm.
And every time I asked him a question, he gave me a 5 to 7 minute prepared speech. And I was like, this is not a TED Talk. This is a conversation. I have an unpopular opinion that you might not like, because you've talked about this a couple of times now. I don't think every business can't be sold. And I've had other people disagree with me, but when someone hires me to be their business coach, or when someone hires you to be their business coach, they've hired Andrew Frazier. They haven't hired Andrew Frazier, Inc., right, Inc. They hired you. So I don't think that you could sell your coaching business to somebody else. What do you want to argue with me on that?
I would say it would be very difficult to sell a coaching business to someone else because you are your business. However, I'm doing some things to make mine sellable in the future, in that, I've created a proprietary methodology that I'm training other people to be able to coach and consult using methods and tools that I've developed.
And that's a way to scale a coaching business.
Yeah, that's one way. Courses and training. There's a lot of ways, but I worked with a doctor who wanted to sell his practice. And, he thought it would be worth, more than $500,000. But when I looked at it, I was like, it's not really worth $100,000 because, unless you're going with it as an employee, which would defeat the purpose of selling, it's not really worth much of anything because, his revenues were decreasing. He was the main person. And, he finally ended up selling for, I think, a couple $100,000, but he had to work for the business for 3 years also.
Mm.
So you're right. You can't, a lot of business, you can't, if you're the primary person who's delivering the products and services, doing all the sales, it's very difficult to be able to sell. And then the other types of businesses, even larger business that are difficult to sell, if you're not making any money. There's a lot of businesses out there not making any money or haven't made any money in the last couple of years and having a decreasing trend. Those are almost impossible to sell because, who wants to buy something that's on its way down?
Yeah, so the important thing there is to have that proprietary, that special blend of paint or something that nobody else has.
Definitely.
And that's what makes you special. We could go down a tangent if I go down this avenue, but I'm going to go down it anyway. I live in a small community and we have 2 hospital systems, and then there was like an independently owned doctor's office. And one of the hospital systems purchased the independently owned doctor's office. And every single doctor at that office quit. And so the hospital system picked up all their clients, but didn't have enough doctors. And nobody wants to move to this community because, again, it's a small community. It's not like I live in a big city that has a bunch of amenities. I live in a cute small town surrounded by lakes, but it's not a big city, right? So it's not attracting all the young doctors. What you just said about your client who was a doctor who had difficulty selling his practice, that is why hospital systems are gobbling up these small practices, because other small doctors, other independent doctors don't want to buy the practices. The only person that a doctor can sell to these days is the hospitals, or for the most part. Am I wrong?
I think it's more like what's going on in accounting. Like all the big accounting firms are buying the small ones because they're trying to grow, and it's easier to grow by buying their customers than doing it organically. And you buy the employees too. But what that does is now either you got to go to a really big firm who charges you an arm and a leg and does less for you, or you got to go to like an independent CPA who is overworked and can't really deliver, medical just like that as well. It's and a lot of other industries, they're just getting rolled up because it's easier to buy business than to create it.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. So what's another unpopular opinion you have?
Well, I think that one thing I always say is most business owners are woefully unprepared for what they're trying to do. So that's a little unpopular, but true.
But it's the 100% true. So how does somebody overcome that?
Well, one is definitely being humble enough to know that you don't know a lot. And, a lot of people have experience, but it's not fully applicable to smaller business. You know a little bit, you know a lot about a little bit, but in small business, you need to know a little bit about a lot. And that's a whole different situation. And most people are only good at a couple things. But as a small business owner, you got to be proficient at a lot of things. So, that the knowledge base, a lot of times they don't teach you what you need to know. And actually in my first book, the third chapter is what's your greatest fear as a business owner. And most times it's numbers and analysis. So most business owners don't really employ numbers that much. They might look at their financials when they're doing their taxes, but business is about making money and money is about numbers. So if you're not using your numbers, understanding your numbers, how are you going to be as successful as you could in business? Could be.
So one of the books that I read when we first started out was Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I think it was Rich Dad. It might have been one of the other books. It might have been the one with the four quadrants or whatever. The one where he talks about if you own a business, you need to understand how to read your balance statement.
Okay, yeah.
All right. I can't remember which book it is. And I have a lot of positive things to say about Robert Kiyosaki, and I also have a lot of negative things to say about Robert Kiyosaki. So we're just going to leave that I learned this from Robert Kiyosaki, right? Learning how to read a balance sheet, how important it is. So my husband and I applied for we wanted to refinance our house. And as business owners, they asked us for our business financials. And we were like, well, that doesn't make any sense because it's a corporation. You don't need to know what our business makes. But they insisted. And then they looked at our financials and they were like, well, you don't, if you're shipping your stuff, how come there isn't a higher shipping expense? And they were looking at the line item for postage and delivery. And I'm like, because you're looking in the wrong place. You need to be looking in the cost of goods sold for outbound freight, And so this person who was making a decision about whether or not my husband and I could refinance our home didn't even understand how to read a balance sheet for a business. So that's how important it is. Because she was trying to prove that we were lying about our income by looking in the wrong place.
And what's not surprising? That's totally not surprising to me because even people who do business lending, many of them don't know how to read the statements. They just pass on the information to other people. Because business is confusing to a lot of people, especially banking and financing. That's why it's way harder if you're self-employed because they don't really understand how to analyze and figure out what to do with you. So so definitely that is key. But there's a lot of things that people just don't know that they need to know. That's why I resorted to writing because I've learned so much and met with so many people that you see patterns. You see where the challenges are. So trying to highlight it, one, definitely on, using your numbers, understanding your numbers. One of the things that, everybody says is you need access to capital. If I had more money, but I would say most business owners that are looking for financing do not deserve it.
They don't know what to do with the money that they have.
Right. And 90% of problems I'm fine because you're not selling it. If you sold more, you wouldn't need the financing.
Yeah, which means you need to learn how to sell.
You need to learn how to sell.
Didn't we start this conversation there?
Yeah, that's circular.
And marketing isn't pretty pictures.
Yes.
Marketing is your overall message. It's that what the warm fuzzies that people feel about. Because when I think about Coca-Cola, I think about happiness. Coca-Cola, even though I don't drink Coke, I don't drink sodas. But when I think about Coca-Cola, I immediately feel happiness. I remember going to the Coca-Cola factory and just the overall, it was like going to an amusement park, the little factory tour, right? Everything about Coca-Cola is happiness. They have that brand down perfectly. And it's not in their pretty pictures or their commercials. It's in the overall message that they have put out in the world. Nike is the same thing. When you think about Nike, you think about being the best athlete you can possibly be. And that's not what they've done in there, pretty pictures in there and their marketing. It's the message that they have been telling the world.
And, when I think of Coke, I think of Mean Joe Green being from Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's Mean Joe.
Yeah. But even that kid's face,
Right.
the happiness on the kid's face after Mean Joe Green gave him his nasty, what are they called? Uniform. Yeah. Yeah. Oh my God. I forgot about that commercial. That was a great commercial.
It was. So, but
this is about messaging. So I think it's appropriate to share this. When I was a kid, I grew up in Washington State, and there's Mount Rainier, and we had a beer company called Rainier Beer. So I'm talking about, I'm 7, 8 years old. And the Rainier Beer commercial was a dude on a motorcycle driving up the Mount Rainier, and his motorcycle was going, Rainier Beer. So the whole message behind Rainier is the freedom, the uniqueness, the individuality, the outdoorsness. I mean, they in that little tiny thing, they told us what their message was. And they could have told us their message any other way too. But that was how and I am now 55 years old. So almost 50 years later, that commercial still impacts me.
So, but I would say that I have to just agree with you slightly in that.
Good, because this is about unpopular opinions around small business growth.
What I've found is many times as a small business owner, you need to do the opposite of what a big business does. So when you look at big businesses and what they're doing, you shouldn't pattern yourself necessarily after what they're doing.
I agree with you there.
They have a lot of money. They have different strengths. And, in a small business, you're the brand. Whereas big business, they spend millions of dollars developing a brand because it's a lot easier to like a person than a company. Mm-hmm. You have to focus on your personal brand a lot. Your messaging goes with that, but you have to manage your marketing resources in a different way and compete differently than a big business would.
So Chris Dew, who's a marketing guru on YouTube,
mm-hmm.
I don't know how good he is, but he's somebody that I watched this video recently. So what he says is that a company without a story is a commodity. A product without a story is a commodity. And if you have a story, then you have something special. Mm-hmm. So you need to tell your story. I can't tell you how many small business owners don't tell their story on their website. And if you go there and it just says woman-owned business based in Pittsburgh that makes teddy bears, right? If that's what your About Us page says, it's a commodity. It's a teddy bear commodity. But if you talk about why you make the teddy bears, what got you to Pittsburgh, so tell your story. I know that a lot of folks want to have this wall between themselves and the world because they want to have they don't want their personal information out there. But you don't have to tell them your mailing address and your personal phone number. You just need to share your story, because unless you do, you're not special enough. And I think that when I said messaging, I meant story.
So, and the other thing is, anybody who wants to know your address and phone number can find it anyways online.
There is a whole business model around wiping the internet of your phone number and address. There are ways to do that. So another unpopular opinion is that you don't need a business plan, or that you need a business plan. What do you think of that? Because when I went to coaching school
mm-hmm.
to get my coaching certificate, we spent way too much time on business planning. And having owned a business for as many years as I think at that point it had been 20 years. Having owned a business for as many years as I had, I knew the only time I ever needed a business plan of that kind of business plan was when I was asking for money.
Okay.
And we only asked for money once. We needed some startup funding for the business. And that's the only time we ever asked for money. So what are your thoughts?
I think that yes and no. Each business is in a different situation. Definitely, if you're looking for financing from a bank or from the SBA, you're going to need a full business plan. Unfortunately, most business owners don't have any plan or any plan that's current at all. And what you're doing is you're really hurting yourself, because your business plan doesn't have to be long or super intricate. But you have to think about what you're doing before you do it, and that's what a business plan does. It's saying, I think I'm going to do this, and this is what I think is going to happen. But then you can look at it on paper and say, if I do this, this probably isn't going to happen. So maybe I should do something different. But most business owners are like, I think this will work, so I'm going to just do this. And as a result, a lot of times you miss things because you didn't really think it through, look at it, get feedback on it. So you have to have some sort of plan and some sort of look at what you're trying to do, and the ability to step back and analyze it and get feedback. That doesn't mean you have to write a long plan, but you at least need like an executive summary, an outline of the things that you're trying to do so that what you're trying to do is cohesive. A lot of business owners are doing things that aren't aligned. So, you're doing this over here, but then you're doing this over here that detracts from it. So, so like you said, you don't need a financing business plan for everything, but you do need something that you write down and can think about and analyze to make sure that you're making the best decisions and understand the impact of your decision before you start putting your money in.
So let's break that down into the pieces of the business plan that are necessary. So if you have no idea what we're talking about in terms of a business plan, when you apply for an SBA loan or any sort of financing from a bank or other kind of lender, they want this 25, 30, 50-page document that ensures that gives them some reassurance that your business is going to be able to repay that loan. And there are important parts of the business plan that you should have, like your financial sheets. You should be doing your balance sheet and your P&L every 3 months anyway. Some people say every month. I think if you look at it every month, you could get drowned in it. Some people only look at it once a year. But you should be looking at your balance sheet and your P&L, and that goes in the business plan. Your executive summary is the exact same thing as a boilerplate about your business. So it is who you are and what your business does, right? That's the executive summary. And then you need to be able to talk about who is running the business. Like this is the CEO, this is the president, this is the owner, right? You need to be able to explain who the owner is. And the owner and the company need to be two different things because they're not the same.
They're not the same. Sometimes they're pretty similar. Definitely, I do a lot of business plans for people who are looking for financing. I do their financial projections, so I'm real familiar with what they're looking for. Definitely everything starts with the executive summary. Well, it starts and ends with the executive summary because, once you write your whole plan, you need to come back to make sure it's all together.
Vision statement, mission, all that's in that executive summary.
That stuff. But I'd say there's really two things in your business plan that really matter. Maybe. So one is your marketing analysis and your marketing plan. They need to know that, you're going to be able to market and sell effectively, and you have a great strategy and you're trying to market and sell to the right people. Because a lot of businesses never find the right product market fit. And a lot of times they end up out of business. And then the numbers, they need to see that, everything else in your plan is an assumption. Most things in business, they need, facts. They need to know, this is what I plan to do and this is what I think will happen and this is what it looks like from a numbers perspective. So, because, when you're looking for financing, a big piece of it is just credibility as a business person. And, the more you planned and prepared, the more credible you are and the more likely it is that you're going to be able to be successful. So they're really just looking for, can I believe that they can actually do this and return our money.
So I am a huge fan of Alan Dibb's one-page marketing plan. You can literally create your entire marketing plan on a piece of paper. I'm going to be in the wrong order, but there's 9 parts to the marketing plan, and they are each one sentence. You identify who your target market is. You identify where your target market hangs out. You identify what you say to the messages to the target market, and then you come up with your funnel, your sales funnel. So how are you going to get them into the purchasing process? And then the last 3 steps have to do with follow-up and asking for referrals. And it is a beautiful one-page template that just takes you through everything that you need to do to market. But identifying the target market and your message to your target market is where it starts. Without the message, we're back to the story. You've got to tell your story.
Right. I mean, I love Alan Dibb's his methodology. Actually, that's what I recommend people use when they're doing their business plan, because he actually talks about marketing from a small business perspective, where most marketing books and courses and training are really focused on large business marketing, which, like I said before, many times is the opposite of what you should do as a small business.
And the thing about his concepts is that they're scalable. So you can be a solopreneur and do his steps, and you can be a very large corporation and do his steps and have the same benefit.
Yeah.
So we're talking about business growth, so it's a scalable thing.
Right. One thing about messaging is your messaging needs to be aligned. And by doing your plan that way, everything you do from a marketing perspective, from before you even reach out to a potential client, it takes you through the prospecting, lead nurturing, and customer. So basically everything throughout your whole marketing process is aligned to move people along the process further. That's really good, because a lot of businesses, a lot of times your marketing may be, and you're doing something here that doesn't match up with what you're doing here, so you're not going to get the result here. Yeah, I highly recommend. That's one of the 3 books, besides my 3 books, that I recommend business owners read.
So holy moly, it's time to start wrapping up. So tell us about your 3 books. What are the titles of your 3 books? And there will be a link in the show notes so that you can check out Andrew's books. So tell me what the titles are, and
Okay.
1-page synopsis of each one.
Okay, so I've got
one sentence. We'll be here all day if you give a 1-page synopsis of each one.
Right. So I've got 3 books. I call them the handbook, the workbook, and the playbook. So the handbook is Running Your Small Business Like a Pro. So that's the first book I wrote. That's like a handbook. It tells you the things you need to know how to do marketing, operations, leadership, financing, financial management. The second is the workbook that goes chapter for chapter with the handbook, because a lot of people learn by doing. It's, an opportunity to practice, the marketing chapter, the finance chapter, the business. My most recent book is called the Masterpreneur Playbook, and it outlines the 5 steps that every business needs to take to go from startup to scaling. And there's really 2 dimensions. There's the 5 steps that your business has to take, but there's also 5 stages of evolution that you have to undergo so that you can lead your business through each of the 5 stages. All those together is sort of what I call the Masterpreneur combo, but it really gives you the hands-on as well as the strategic focus to really move your business forward and grow.
I like that terminology, Masterpreneur, because most solopreneurs are a master at what they do. And I wish we had another hour to talk about more unpopular opinions around this, because there are a lot. But most solopreneurs go into it because they were really good. They're a really good blacksmith. They're a really good furniture maker. They're a really good engineer. And they think that they can build a business around that skill, but they don't have the business acumen to actually turn it into a business. I wish we had more time, but we're out of time. So what are the 3 books that you recommend? The other 3 books.
The 1-page marketing plan,
which is the only book I recommend to most people.
Okay. I recommend Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People, because if you're going to sell or market, those are the skills you need.
Mm-hmm.
And then I recommend The E-Myth by Michael Gerber, because that gives you a window into what it really is to be an entrepreneur, because what you think it is a myth. And then he talks about why most businesses fail and what you can do about it.
So have you read Systemology by David Jennings?
I have not.
Okay, that you need to add that to your reading list, and you'll find that Systemology will replace the E-Myth from your list. The E-Myth was written 25, 30 years ago, and It was fantastic. I mean, it's the book that my husband and I used to create the systems for our business that made us extremely successful. We were able to teach high school and college students how to make bespoke custom furniture, right? So because we had a system in place. Systemology brings it into the 21st century. So you will very much enjoy Systemology. So I agree with you with 1-page marketing plan. I also agree with you with How to Win Friends and Influence People. Maybe a different book that I love is Networking Like a Pro, because Dale Carnegie again was written last century. Networking Like a Pro was written, and Brian Hilliard is the author in that book. Just modern day networking. Yeah, but I agree with you. You need to know marketing, you need to know networking, and you need to know systems. Those are the three things that you need to know. We just come at it with the three different books. One book in common, two different books.
But the same message and information.
Same message and information. I wish we could talk for another hour, Andrew. I think we could cover so much more. I've had a great time. Is there anything that we did not talk about that you absolutely want to mention?
I think that one thing that I'd like to mention, we're on your show here. I'm going to have you as a guest on my show coming up.
I'm looking forward to it.
And every Tuesday night, I do a live stream called Leadership Live at 8:05, talking small business. So you're welcome to join us. We always have great guests, just like you do, Candace.
And how can you find your live show?
On LinkedIn. Connect with me on LinkedIn. It goes out live over LinkedIn and YouTube.
Okay. So, and links to his LinkedIn and his YouTube will be in the show notes. All the links. Everything you need is going to be at gratitudegeek.com. Look for episode 270.
Okay.
Andrew Frazier, this is your moment of gratitude. For whom or what are you most grateful?
I'd have to say my wife. I mean, we've been married 31 years. We've got 2 kids. We've been through a lot successfully, thankfully, and we still like being together. That says a lot, especially for a lot of business owners. It's tough. Business could be tough on your marriage.
Thanks for tuning in to Gratitude Geek, the podcast for grateful micropreneurs building genuine, lasting relationships with clients, colleagues, and community. Our theme music is by Rev Brock and Soul Lily. A huge thank you to our guest, Andrew Frazier. You can find his links in the show notes at gratitudegeek.com. This is episode 270. I've been your host, Candace Ridardi. Stay groovy, my friends.
Stay groovy, too.